Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. It's Monday the 28th of February. I'm Andrew Wilson and this is Scotland at 7. This evening we have an update for you on the top stories from Ukraine, Scotland and around the world. Today Ukraine has begun talks with Russia. President Volodymyr Zelensky is not hopeful of success, but said, "Let them try so that later not a single citizen of Ukraine has any doubt that I, as president, tried to stop the war." The talks ended this evening with no reports on progress as the parties returned to Kyiv and Moscow. The UK Transport Secretary Grant Shapps announced today that Russian vessels will be banned from British ports in an effort to ensure that the Kremlin isn't funding its war effort in Ukraine with sales of oil and gas in the UK. The pledge came as multiple Russian oil tankers were either docked at UK ports or on either way to drop off consignments in South Wales and Scotland. A Russian oil tanker was moored at Milford Haven in South Wales on Monday, even as Shapps announced plans to bar any future arrivals. And speaking in Parliament on Monday, Brendan O'Hara MP of the Scottish National Party questioned why the Russian tanker the NS Century was allowed to dock at the port of Finnart near the Faslane nuclear submarine base. Another vessel, the NS Champion, which is operated by the Russian state-owned shipping company Sovcomflot, was due to dock at the Flotta oil terminal in Orkney at 6 p.m. tomorrow, but the NS Champion is now expected to be barred from the port. Russian rocket attacks killed dozens of people in the eastern Ukrainian city of Kharkiv as ceasefire talks between Kyiv and Moscow got underway, with the Kremlin facing unprecedented international sanctions that have created a new economic reality for Russia. But after 4 days of fighting and a slower than expected Russian advance, the Ukrainian Interior Ministry advisor Anton Herashchenko said on Monday that Kharkiv had been massively fired on, leaving dozens of dead and hundreds of wounded. The unprecedented onslaught may be retaliation for the events on Sunday, when Ukrainian forces repelled a move by Russian light armoured vehicles to enter and seize the city. Its governor, Oleg Senegubov, said that Kharkiv was under Kiev's control, something that other residents have confirmed. With fighting continuing around several cities and the Russian ruble freefall, the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky urged Russian troops to abandon their equipment and leave the battlefield to save their lives, claiming that 4,500 of them were already dead. Russia's nuclear forces were placed on high alert in line with Putin's orders to his defense chiefs on Sunday. Zelensky said he was skeptical about the talks' prospects for success, but added, "Let them try." Pre-dawn blasts were again heard in the capital Kyiv, in Kharkiv, and in the port city of Mariupol on the Sea of Azov, officials said, but they added that the attempts of Russian ground forces to capture major urban centres were still being repelled. Western analysts said they were alarmed, however, by a referendum vote in neighbouring pro-Russian Belarus that could result in nuclear weapons being stationed on Belarusian soil for the first time since the fall of the Soviet Union. Terrified Ukrainian families huddled in shelters, basements or corridors, with millions thought to have fled their homes and more than 500,000 having left Ukraine to escape the biggest invasion of a European country since the Second World War. Ukraine's former defense minister, Andriy Zagordynyuk, said Russia was now using multiple rocket launcher systems to civilian infrastructure. Grad attacks were taking place in Kyiv and Mariupol, he said, amid Kremlin frustration that a military breakthrough had not yet been achieved. Kharkiv is a Russian-speaking city and home to 1.4 million people. Elsewhere in Ukraine, there was a relative lull in the capital Kyiv, where supermarkets were reopened and residents were allowed out of bomb shelters and homes for the first time since a curfew was imposed on Saturday. The strategic port city of Mariupol was hanging on, according to Alexei Arestovich, an advisor to Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky. Residents said that the eastern port city on the Sea of Azov was surrounded by Russian forces and under heavy fire. The Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on Monday signed an official request for Ukraine to join the European Union. Zelensky has asked the European Union to allow Ukraine to gain membership immediately under a special procedure as it defends itself from invasion by Russian forces. The Ukrainian Parliament called it a historic moment, and the European Parliament will adopt a resolution tomorrow calling on EU institutions to work towards granting EU candidate status to Ukraine, and in the meantime to continue to work towards integration into the EU single market. An EU official has explained the process. The letter of application is written to the President of the Council of the EU, which is currently held by France. Member States, the European Parliament and national parliaments are then informed of the application by the Council. A meeting of the 27 EU Foreign Affairs Ministers, known as the General Affairs Council, needs to take a decision to formally seek the European Commission's opinion on the application. It would normally take 15 to 18 months for a Commission to issue its opinion, although that period could be significantly shortened depending upon the political considerations, the official said. There is a pre-accession period of varying length, during which the candidate country adapts its institutions, standards and infrastructures to enable it to meet its obligations as a member state. The accession process involves compliance with the accession criteria, including adoption and implementation of EU law. Ukraine and its allies on Monday called for a United Nations inquiry into alleged war crimes committed by Russian forces during its military actions in Ukraine. The United Nations Human Rights Council voted today to accept Ukraine's request to hold an urgent debate on Thursday on Russia's invasion. A Ukrainian draft resolution will be considered at the urgent debate. If adopted, a commission of 3 independent experts would investigate all alleged violations of international law in Crimea and the Donetsk and Luhansk regions since 2014, and in other areas of Ukraine since Russia's invasion last week. Ukraine's ambassador to the United Nations in Geneva, Yevgenia Filipenko, told the Human Rights Council Russian forces attempt to sow panic among the population by specifically targeting kindergartens and orphanages, hospitals and mobile medical aid brigades, thus committing acts that may amount to war crimes. Sheba Crocker, the US ambassador to the UN in Geneva, said in a statement to Reuters that Monday's vote to hold the debate showed that Russia was totally isolated on the Council. Only 4 countries supported Russia's position, clearly demonstrating the international community is united in condemning Russia's egregious action, she said. The Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov cancelled his planned visit to Geneva to address the forum on Tuesday, which Moscow's mission said was due to an unprecedented ban on his flight in the airspace of a number of EU countries that have imposed anti-Russian sanctions, but gave no specifics. The cancellation coincided with neutral Switzerland imposing financial sanctions against Russian President Vladimir Putin, Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin, and Lavrov. The Scottish Government will provide both financial aid and medical supplies to Ukraine following the illegal invasion by Russia. Firstly, an initial £4 million in humanitarian aid will be provided. As part of the global humanitarian efforts, this will help provide basic humanitarian assistance, including in health, water, sanitation, and shelter. Officials are in discussions with humanitarian aid agencies to identify the best route to get this aid most quickly to those affected by the crisis, including to those displaced by the invasion. In addition to financial aid, the Scottish Government will provide medical supplies to Ukraine. These supplies provided are based on a list of urgently needed medical equipment, supplies, and pharmaceuticals provided by the Ukrainian government via the consulate in Edinburgh. The supplies to be provided will include anaesthetic machines, syringe pumps, and bandages. However, further work is underway to identify what further supplies can be provided and in what quantities, in order that they can be shipped to Ukraine as quickly as possible. The First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, said, Scotland has given its unqualified support for Ukrainian independence, sovereignty and territorial integrity, and to the people of Ukraine as they bravely resist the unprovoked and illegal aggression of the Russian regime. As a responsible and compassionate global citizen, we will help them with an initial £4 million in financial aid to provide essential help to those in desperate need. And we are also working with the Ukrainian government to provide medical supplies from stocks we hold. We are coordinating with other UK nations to ensure that these supplies get to where they are desperately needed as quickly as possible. Scotland's Humanitarian Emergency Response Fund is currently assessing the response capacity for the Ukraine crisis. And the UN Secretary General has announced that the UN will launch an appeal on Tuesday this week to fund its humanitarian operations in Ukraine, with the need expected to be more than $1 billion in donations for humanitarian relief in Ukraine over the next 3 months. The SNP has demanded that the UK government follows the lead of the EU by waiving visa requirements for Ukrainian refugees fleeing the Russian invasion. It comes as the EU confirmed that it would take in Ukrainian refugees for up to 3 years, without asking them to go through the paperwork of applying for asylum first, and regardless of whether or not they have a family connection in any EU member state. The UK government has so far refused to match these efforts, simply restating that any Ukrainian settled in the UK will be allowed to welcome immediate family members, only to join them under existing restrictive family migration rules. The ramp up in pressure on the UK government comes after the UN confirmed today that more than 500,000 people have fled Ukraine since Russia invaded the country last week. Responding to the Home Secretary's statement today on support for Ukrainian refugees fleeing the Russian invasion, the SNP's Shadow Home Secretary, Stuart MacDonald MP, said, "The Home Secretary's announcement, or lack of, was a dereliction of duty, and it fell a million miles short of what is needed at this critical time to support Ukrainian refugees in desperate need of our help." He continued, "The grim reality is that the UK government is alone among European allies in forcing Ukrainians seeking safety to jump through its restrictive visa hoops to reach sanctuary here. It is even more alone in legislating to criminalise, marginalise and impoverish those who seek asylum through its anti-refugee bill." FIFA and UEFA have acted in unison to suspend Russian teams from international football competition. The most powerful bodies in football acted after days of growing protest. Russia has now been removed from qualification for this winter's World Cup, and its remaining club side will no longer compete in the Europa League. The suspension means that Russia will not be able to face Poland in a World Cup playoff semi-final next month, while its women's team will also be barred from this summer's European Championships in England. UEFA also announced a second highly significant move, confirming that it had cancelled a long-standing and highly lucrative sponsorship deal with Gazprom. The Russian gas company has been sponsor of the Champions League for a decade, and the final of this year's competition was to have been played in the Gazprom Arena in St. Petersburg. Last week, UEFA moved the match to Paris and has now severed the relationship entirely. Climate breakdown is accelerating rapidly. Many of the impacts will be more severe than predicted, and there is only a narrow chance left of avoiding its worst ravages, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has said. Even at current levels, human actions in heating the climate are causing dangerous and widespread disruption, threatening devastation to swathes of the natural world and rendering many areas unlivable, according to a landmark report published on Monday. Scientific evidence is unequivocal. Climate change is a threat to human well-being and the health of the planet, said Hans Otto Pürtner, a co-chair of Working Group 2 of the IPCC. Any further delay in concerted global action will miss a brief and rapidly closing window to secure a livable future. In what some scientists termed the bleakest warning yet, the summary report from the Global Authority on Climate Science says that droughts, floods, heat waves and other extreme weather are accelerating and wreaking increasing damage. Allowing global temperatures to increase by more than 1.5 degrees C above pre-industrial levels, as looks likely on current trends in greenhouse gas emissions, would result in some irreversible impacts. These include the melting of ice caps and glaciers, and a cascading effect whereby wildfires, the die-off of trees, the drying of peatlands, and the thawing of permafrost release additional carbon emissions, amplifying the warming further. Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, said, "I have seen many scientific reports in my time, but nothing like this. Today's IPCC report is an atlas of human suffering and a damning indictment of failed climate leadership." John Kerry, the US Special Presidential Envoy for Climate, said the report paints a dire picture of the impacts already occurring because a warmer world and the terrible risks to our planet if we continue to ignore science. We have seen the increase in climate-fueled extreme events and the damage that is left behind, lives lost and livelihoods ruined. The question at this point is not whether we can altogether avoid the crisis, it is whether we can avoid the worst consequences. The report says, everywhere is affected, with no inhabited region escaping dire impacts from rising temperatures and increasingly extreme weather. About half the global population, between 3 and 3.6 billion people, live in areas highly vulnerable to climate change. Millions of people face food and water shortages owing to climate change, even at current levels of heating. Mass die-offs of species from trees to corals are already underway, and 1.5 degrees C above pre-industrial levels constitutes a critical level beyond which the impacts of the climate crisis accelerate strongly and some become irreversible. Coastal areas around the globe and small low-lying islands face inundation at temperature rises of more than 1.5 degrees C. Key ecosystems are losing their ability to absorb carbon dioxide, turning them from carbon sinks into carbon sources. And some countries have agreed to conserve 30% of the Earth's land, but conserving half may be necessary to restore the ability of natural ecosystems to cope with the damage that has been wreaked upon them. This is the second part of the IPCC's latest assessment report, an updated, comprehensive review of global knowledge of the climate, which has been 7 years in the making and draws on peer-reviewed work of thousands of scientists. The assessment report is the sixth since the IPCC was first convened by the UN in 1988, and may be the last to be published while there is still some chance of avoiding the worst. A first instalment by the IPCC's Working Group 1, published last August, on the physical science of climate change, said the climate crisis was unequivocally caused by human actions, resulting in changes that were unprecedented, with some becoming irreversible. This second part, by Working Group 2, deals with the impacts of climate breakdown, sets out areas where the world is most vulnerable, and details how we can try to adapt and protect against some of the impacts. A third section, that is due in April, will cover ways to cut greenhouse gas emissions, and the final part in October will summarise these lessons for governments meeting in Egypt for the UN COP27 Climate Summit. Small islands will be among those worst affected. Walton Webson, an ambassador of Antigua and Barbuda and the chair of the Alliance of Small Island States, called the findings cataclysmic. He urged the UN to convene a special session to consider action. We are continuing to head for the precipice. We say our eyes are open to the risks, but when you look at global emissions, if anything, we are accelerating towards the cliff edge. We are not seeing the action from the big emitters that is required to get emissions down in this critical decade. This means halving emissions by 2030 at the latest. It is clear that time is slipping away from us, he continued. Governments in other parts of the world could help their people to adapt to some of the impacts of the climate crisis, the report says, by building flood defences, helping farmers to grow different crops, or building more resilient infrastructure. But the authors say that the capacity of the world to adapt to the impacts will diminish rapidly the further temperatures rise, quickly reaching hard limits beyond which adaptation would be impossible. The climate crisis also has the power to worsen problems such as hunger, ill health and poverty, the report makes clear. Dave Ray, the director of the Edinburgh Climate Change Institute at the University of Edinburgh, said, Like taking a wrecking ball to a set of global dominoes, climate change in the 21st century threatens to destroy the foundations of food and water security, smash onwards through the fragile structures of human and ecosystem health, and ultimately shake the very pillars of human civilization. Removing face coverings in classrooms is a positive milestone for high school pupils and staff, but continued vigilance is essential to beat COVID-19, the Education Secretary, Shirley-Ann Somerville MSP, has said. Following the First Minister's announcement earlier this month, updated guidance for schools comes into force today. The guidance is clear that teachers and pupils who wish to continue to wear a face covering in the classroom will be fully supported to do so. Specific mitigations relating to assemblies and transition visits for learners who will start primary or secondary in August 2022 will also be eased from today. Ms Somerville said, "The last 2 years have been really tough for our children and young people. Teachers and support staff have also had to operate in a challenging environment, but all have worked incredibly hard to deliver a quality learning experience for pupils." The removal of the requirement to wear face coverings in classrooms is a positive milestone, she continued. It signals the possibility of a brighter future where schools can regain some normality. And of course, pupils and staff who continue to choose to wear face coverings in class will be supported in doing so. And childcare services hit by Omicron will be able to apply for grants of up to £4,500. Nearly 5,800 services could benefit from the new £9.8 million Childcare Sector Omicron Impacts Fund. Registered childminders, as well as private and third sector children's daycare services, can apply from the 8th of March. This includes early learning in childcare settings and school-aged childcare services. To date, the Scottish Government has made available around £35 million of dedicated financial support to childcare services during the pandemic. And the Children's Minister, Claire Hockey MSP, said the childcare sector was badly hit by Omicron. Many settings experienced increased levels of staff and child absence, resulting in temporary loss of income. These one-off grants are aimed at helping providers to mitigate some of those acute financial challenges. The fund is open to childminders and private and third sector daycare of children's services who are registered with the Care Inspectorate as at the 31st of December 2021. Grant amounts vary according to the registered size of each service, and the grants will range from £950 to £4,500. And that was our final item this evening. In making these programmes, Broadcasting Scotland relies on the support of viewers and others who value our distinctive and Scottish approach to news, current affairs and culture. If you would like to support us, then please consider subscribing or donating to Broadcasting Scotland, and you will find the link to do that on the screen now. We really need all of the financial assistance that we can get in order to continue with these programmes and also to do more of what we do. There are other ways in which you can contribute to our work. If you would like to volunteer to work with Broadcasting Scotland, either behind the scenes or in front of the cameras, or in any other way that helps our work and promotes the station, then please visit our website at www.broadcastingscotland.scot and send us a message there. We will be here at 7 o'clock tomorrow evening for the next edition of Scotland at 7, so please tune in then. Meantime, I would like to thank everybody for watching this evening. Please keep warm and keep well. Bye-bye.